You're listening to the Good Food CFO podcast, where we focus on financial strategies for building a profitable food business. I'm your host, Sarah Delavan. Today on the podcast, I am joined by Andy Janaitis. The founder and chief strategist of PPC Pitbulls is here to discuss Google Ads. If building a business on your own terms includes selling your product via your brand's own website, and you want to drive traffic to that site, Google Ads may be a good fit for you. Andy has over 10 years of agency experience in the digital space across several industries, and he now focuses on creating custom digital marketing strategies and driving measurable results for his craft food, beverage, and clothing brand clients, for whom PPC Pitbulls now manages over $1 million in annual ad spend. Andy is helping us to understand all that Google Ads and optimization tools can do. He's also sharing the 3 things you should have in place before considering Google Ads, the role that your margins and your shipping costs play in determining if Google Ads are the right fit for your business, the return on investment that you can expect if they are, some ad spend budgeting tips, and many more insights. Let's get to it. Hey, Andy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So as I mentioned in the intro, you are the founder of PPC Pitbulls, and I want you to share with the audience what you do and how you help businesses.
Definitely. So we're a small digital marketing agency. We started in about 2020, and we support what we call craft brands. So these are brands that make food or clothing typically, but the type of high quality products that customers are proud to wear and eat and use every day. And what we do for them is really to help kind of guide not only the digital marketing strategy, but primarily we focus on paid search and paid social. So it would be your Google ads, Facebook and Instagram ads, as well as email marketing.
So I'm going to be honest with you. I remember Google Ads. It seemed new to me. Gosh, should I say 20 years ago? Is that a thing? I remember the job that I was in at the time. I'm trying to do the math in my head really quickly. And I don't hear about them very often. So I'm going to ask you a very blunt question. Google Ads are still a thing and they're still helpful?
They definitely are. They're definitely very helpful. You know, any search you do, I'm sure you'll see it's probably more ads than it is organic listings on there. But yeah, now especially a lot of people are talking about Facebook and more recently Instagram and TikTok. So it's no surprise you hear a little less, but things are definitely a lot different than probably when you were working with them back in the day.
Yeah. So on that note, on them being different than what I understand them to be from way back in the day, can you talk a little bit about like what are Google Ads and just sort of the foundational information that we need to know to really have a conversation about them today?
Definitely. So the big thing is, as I mentioned, when somebody makes a search, you always see at the top there, typically there'll be a little carousel of products. And then right below that, you'll get what looks like a regular search listing, but you'll notice the little ad icon next to it. And essentially, it's just a way for a business to get out there and say, hey, I'm willing to bid on when somebody's searching either for this particular keyword or when somebody's searching for this particular product type, let me go ahead and get in front of them. And then more recently, Google also has display. So that would be when you're moving around on the internet, it's over in your sidebar or even in your Gmail inbox. And then also YouTube ads, so bringing a video aspect to it. If you've ever watched a YouTube video and you see that first, like wait 5 seconds to skip, that's your ad running. So those are the types of placements that we help our customers to get.
Interesting. Is each of those a different individual ad? Like, for example, when something comes up in a Google search, that's a different ad than what would come up in a YouTube video.
Definitely. So we would call those individual ads as they're showing, but what's kind of neat is more recently Google has started to put all of those together into what we would call campaigns. So campaigns really are, how you configure how much you're willing to spend and what information you want to show. And in the past, you would have had to do a separate campaign for search ads and for shopping ads or for YouTube ads. But more recently, we focus on what's called Performance Max And it's really just a way that we can put all of those assets together. So the headlines of the ads, the descriptions, maybe a YouTube video, maybe some, creative display type information. And then Google will mix and match them and optimize really across all the different channels. So it's made it a lot easier in a lot of ways to figure out the right point in the customer life cycle to hit them.
So before we go any further, I think it's important to talk about who is Google Ads right for, or what type of business is Google Ads a good fit for? Because I think whenever we have a conversation like this, I think we run the risk of implying that this is something that every business should be doing. So can you qualify for us, like who should be considering this and who might not be ready and can kind of put it aside for a while?
Yeah, it can be a really powerful tool, but there's a few things that you want to make sure that you have going for your business so you're really ready to be successful there. One of the big things that we think about is the level of maturity in both your e-commerce platform in general, and then also your digital marketing. So some of the things that we really focus on, first of all, just the basics. Do you have your website set up? Are things ready to be shipped in a reasonable time frame? We had a experience working with a company that said, hey, we're ready to run Google Ads, but we can only ship about 30 orders a week. And that's our absolute max. And it was like, well, if you don't really have the capacity to scale with it, there's not really a whole lot of point to spend the money and get these additional orders. So those are some of the things, just making sure that you're ready to sell products online. Seems pretty basic, but definitely something to make sure you're ready to do. And then that you can kind of scale if you're going to be paying to get more traffic, paying to get more purchases, make sure that you're able to handle those. Then the other piece of it kind of gets to where your margins are. So one of the big metrics we use, I'm sure we'll spend a little bit of time on the CFO podcast talking about some metrics and ways to measure success here. But one of the big things we use is ROAS, or return on ad spend. It's basically just the revenue that you got in response to your ad divided by the cost or the ad spend that you put out there. And typically we'll see like 2 to 3x is like a really, kind of a sweet spot, a really scalable area to be. Not to say that, we've had success with certain companies that are scaling much higher than that, but typically, we'll find that's where you can really put some money behind it and really get those types of results. So if you find that, hey, my product margins just aren't there, or my shipping costs just aren't there where I need to get substantially higher than 2 to 3x, I would say that's probably maybe not the right channel for you. You may want to try something different out.
Can we dig into that a little bit deeper? Because I want to make sure that everyone listening understands the math of what you just said. So when you're talking about revenue divided by ad spend and the result being 2 to 3x, you're saying that if you invest $1 in ad spend, you will receive $2 to $3 in revenue in return.
Worth of purchase revenue. Yeah. So that would be, the actual dollar amount that people are spending online for that individual purchase that came out of that individual ad. Okay. So one of the things we think about too is kind of that customer lifetime value. So if you say, hey, I just can't even get even close to that where that would be profitable. For every product I sell, I need to get, or I can't put nearly that amount of money in to get that sale. Well, think about maybe if it's kind of new customer acquisition, maybe you are able to spend that on the first purchase, because then we're collecting their email and we're going to be able to remarket to them and find some other value elsewhere. But yeah, just on that first purchase revenue, that's kind of what we're looking at. That ROAS figure is a really common metric we use to measure ourselves.
Yeah. And so if someone spends $3, right, on your website on product, then we're subtracting $1 right off the bat, right, as ad spend. Then you've got your cost of goods sold and then the other things that go into producing your product. So if you don't have, whatever that is, 1 divided by, it was 33%, right? If you don't have 33% to give away in this example, then this might not work for you. That is huge. That is really important to know. So I'm going to put my CFO hat on for a second. You've got to know what your margins are overall, but also per channel, right? And so then when you understand what the return on investment is here, you can determine if this is for you and if this makes sense. I also am thinking that as you talk about customer, like lifetime value of the customer, it's probably important to know how many online shoppers are repeat buyers.
Definitely. And so before I get too deep into that, and I think this kind of ties into it, I also want to mention, as we're talking about all these different pieces of revenue and all these different calculations, one of the other big, like, are you ready to even start with Google Ads, is you've got to be set up for conversion tracking and revenue tracking, so that we can make sure that when somebody does make a purchase, not only are we able to measure, how many purchases total has the site gotten, but we can also, attribute that to an individual ad click or an individual channel where the traffic came in. But then to get back to your question, the nice thing is a lot of our clients are on Shopify. So it gives a really, really good, clean, it makes a lot of these calculations really easy. So that's one of the first places that you may want to go to look and see, okay, you can find in the analytics section, what is kind of a customer lifetime value for, individual customer profiles. How many purchases on average has somebody made, and what's the average order value of those purchases?
Yeah, I think that's a really great foundation for, thinking about this. Do I have the margin for it? If the margins are a bit tight, a little bit smaller than I want them to be in terms of, when we consider the ROAS, do I have a system in place where we are attracting people to come back to the website and purchase again? And if that is the case, then we can really see the true value, the lifetime value of this ad spend that we're making. I love it.
And I would say, some people will realize higher ROAS, especially for smaller companies. If you're spending less, it's a lot easier to achieve a higher ROAS. So that's great. If it's, hey, you want to spend $1,000 a month or $2,000 a month, and you can get back a 5X, so you put in $1,000 and you get back $5,000. That may make your numbers look a little bit better in the beginning as you're getting up and running and things are working. I think the 2 to 3X number that I throw out there is because that's really where you're going to find a sweet spot for scalability. So once you've put in $1,000 and gotten back your $5,000 in revenue, the first question is, okay, well, can I put in $10,000 and get back 50,000? And that's where you're really going to start to see that ROAS multiple compress a little bit. But I think, so that we're not scaring people away too quickly either, you can get started at that lower ad spend. And that's where you start spending time developing that customer lifetime value. One of the techniques we like to use is email marketing. Once we've collected somebody's email, how do we make sure that we're staying in touch with them and building a relationship over time, so that we are maximizing, the value that we can provide and get back from a customer.
Yeah. So it's not just we put these ads out there and people are coming. And you mentioned it earlier, it's the full sort of social campaign or online strategy that you have for your business. And I also want to say that if one of your business objectives for this year or the next, 6 to 12 months is not growing your online sales, then don't worry about this right now, right? Like if you're focusing on, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if you're focusing on retail and driving customers to the retail store, Google Ads isn't where you want to be, because what we're driving here is literal click through to your website for a purchase.
Definitely. I would say the one caveat that Google does have a local ad component, and this is like ads basically in the map view, essentially, that if somebody's searching for a product and they're close to you to drive to the stores, that's possible to do. We don't do a ton of that work ourselves. And what I would say is that relies on a huge number of locations. So that works for, if you're a local chain and you might have, say 30 locations or 40 locations and you want to drive people like that, you can do that. But if you're, a single standalone store, if you're, looking to drive people to buy your product inside grocery stores or something like that, I would say that's not the direction you want to go.
Yeah. So you mentioned budget and cost a moment ago. Let's talk about that a little bit more. What is a good starting point? And I'm sure there's no one size fits all answer here, but maybe you can provide a little bit of guidance on where do we start in terms of the budget and how much we spend.
Yeah, I like to think of that in terms of a few different parameters. So the big things we're trying to do, one is not spend all your money. So, we can't, especially in the beginning phases, I should say a lot of this is reliant on automation and getting data back into the model and letting the model improve over time. So it's possible that all of these targets that we're talking about, it may be, a month down the road or 2 months down the road that you start to really see those numbers that you are looking to see and, kind of get everything dialed in and locked into where you want them.
Okay.
So if we set a budget that you can't handle 2 months of spend before you really start seeing some good results, that's not going to work for you. So that's the first component is how much can you afford to spend? And let's make sure that we're not spending more than that. Outside of that, the other piece is from an automation standpoint, and this is kind of a squishy threshold, but for every campaign, or Google calls them ad groups, or even individual ads, you want to make sure you're putting enough data back into the model. So basically you've gotten enough purchases that Google can start to see, hey, when I show the ad to somebody who looks like this, or, lives in this geography, that person buys on a regular basis. So let's show the ad to those types of people more often. So you want to make sure that you're giving Google that data or those data points back. And typically we look for like 30 to 50 purchases in a month, or 30 to 50 data points, I would say, in a month. Then you can start to think through, when you've got that ROAS calculation and you've got your average order value, now you can start to see like, hey, if I'm going to run these ads and I want to get 50 purchases over the course of the first month, my average order value is X. So I'm probably going to be looking at pulling in 50X revenue. So if I'm looking at a 3 or a 4X ROAS, what does that bring my ad spend to? And that kind of gets you started. Obviously, in that learning phase, you're probably not going to be achieving the exact ROAS that you want to be hitting. So you may even be throwing a little bit more money at it to get those first 30 to 50 purchases. And then the other thing we look at is, how complex of a strategy are you running? So if you're just running a single campaign, obviously it's easier to get 30 to 50 data points back into that campaign. But if you're running 7 campaigns, then you may be looking to get, 210 data points or something back in. So we try to start with a really simple setup, which helps minimize the amount of data that you need to get back, or try to keep it as minimal as possible. I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to just making sure you're going to be able to spend enough money to get enough data back into the model, so that it really has an opportunity to learn and grow and provide you some profitable results.
So what you're saying is essentially you, as the business owner and the Google Ads strategist, are getting data points from, I'm sure like there are probably many data points that you can gather.
Yep.
But Google is also paying attention to how many people have I served this ad to, and how many of them actually purchased the product.
Yep.
By following the link. Okay.
We need to make sure we're tracking that data properly, sending that data back to Google, or you're not really going to have much chance of success at all. And Shopify makes that fairly easy.
Okay.
But kind of looking at historically, like we talked about, seeing Google Ads way back in the day, people are really focused on things like cost per click and click-through rate. So that's, the most basic metrics that Google has. Every time I showed this ad to somebody, here's how often they clicked on it. Here's how much I paid every time they clicked on it. And those are good or fine, but ultimately those don't necessarily tie to purchases, right? Because the people who are most likely to buy your product are probably also the people that your competitors are trying to get in front of as well. So you're going to be paying more money. The more likely somebody is to click through to your website, probably you're paying more per click. And then the same thing with when they get onto the website, then we can start to look at some other data points, like how often did somebody add something to the cart, and how often did somebody, begin checkout. And again, these are great. They're probably better than just they click through. But a lot of times, we'll find people, it's always a little mind blowing to me how many people go to a site, add a bunch of items to the cart, and then ultimately don't begin purchase or begin checkout, or ultimately make the checkout. I don't do that very often, but it turns out it's very, very common. As you start looking at the data, it's amazing how high a percentage that occurs. As we're passing that data back to Google, we don't want them to optimize for those types of people who are only going to add items to cart. So that's why we really focus on that purchase only, purchase event. That being said, as we're getting started up, if we think that we're operating on a smaller budget, maybe we can't afford to get 50 purchases worth in the first month, maybe we do start passing back some of those like add to cart events or begin checkout events, just to start feeding a little bit of data back into the model. We call those micro conversions.
So interesting. And then search terms are involved in this process, I assume. And part of the beginning phases, I'm guessing, is identifying what are the words that we're using in our ad and how do we create that? Can you just share a little bit about that process? I know it's probably more detailed than we can share here, but I think it's an important piece to know that I doubt that you can just put your company name out there in an ad and say, okay, when people search my company, I'll show up.
Definitely. So we do that to a degree. We call that branded search, which actually is powerful just to make sure that if any of your competitors are bidding on your company name, they're not taking over. But more generally speaking, as we're talking about what keywords you want to show up for, what's kind of nice is it's actually become much less manual than it used to be. And that gets into some of these automated techniques. So if you're running a specific search campaign, you will still be specifying which search terms that you want to show up for. But we use different match types, they're called, to basically say, hey, if I'm looking for chocolate bars, say, I don't need to say that I want to show up for chocolate bar and chocolate bars and dark chocolate bars. You just say, I want to show up for chocolate, and then Google can do the automation to figure out, here's what people are actually typing in when they mean that chocolate theme.
Oh, wow.
So that helps quite a bit. We would call that keyword research, kind of figuring out all the exact keywords that people are using to find your products. That's become less and less important. I think it is still important to know generally, like, what are people talking about and looking for when they're searching for your product? If for no other reason than just that should be the titles of your pages, and you should be making sure that you're talking to people in the same language that they're using when they're thinking about your product.
Right.
But Google's getting better and better at almost like natural language processing. So they can figure out, based on the content that's on your site and the few basic terms that you provide it, is somebody really looking for this product when they're searching for something like that?
That's fascinating and creepy. Google is so smart. I'm sure that helps with authenticity too, right? In terms of ensuring that someone is promoting and advertising for something that they legitimately offer. And as you were, I think, saying before, like that people are actually going to the site and buying the product. Google wants to know that this is in fact happening in order to continue serving the ads, right? That's kind of what you were saying before.
Exactly. Historically, a lot of stuff was based on individual keywords or, different SEO strategies. And Google has done a lot of work over the years and continues to do more and more work to, I think you use the perfect word there, is authenticity, to kind of get to the real value. So it's not, how often does this one keyword show up on the page? So if somebody knows they want to rank high for it, let's just stuff it and just throw the keyword on the page 9 times. It's really more like, how do we get to something that is providing the information that the customer actually wants? So, if you were to go back to like that chocolate bar example, if you were to say like, hey, when somebody searches for chocolate bar, I want to serve them this product that's, has nothing to do with chocolate. It's, a healthy protein bar.
Right.
Hopefully that's not really that valuable for the customer. They're going to get frustrated when they're clicking through on an ad and finding something that's not what they expected. So Google is doing a lot of work to make sure that's not happening. And I think it almost makes it easier on the small business side, because it goes back to kind of what I would call almost like old school marketing. It's like, all you got to do is tell your story authentically and like connect with customers. And Google does a pretty good job of starting to pick out the details.
Yeah. And what's running through my mind is like on, Facebook or Instagram, those ads are just sort of scrolling by people. They weren't thinking about your product, right? And so it probably, it can pique someone's interest, right? I see the same shoe ad a couple of times. I'm like, oh, maybe I do like those shoes, But with Google, it's like, if you're searching for shoes, you're in the market for the thing you're searching for. You want more information. Like you're like a kind of a willing shopper, right? Like, so it almost seems that there's a difference there, and the ability to sell, right, seems greater because you have an interested shopper, not
Definitely.
just someone doing something else who like saw your chocolate bar pop up.
Definitely. And that goes to part of the kind of strategic piece of it, where when you're just starting out, and especially if you have a product that people don't necessarily know they want, or they're not necessarily shopping for, that's where Facebook and Instagram do a great job of kind of building that awareness and getting yourself in front of somebody. But then once you have a product, they're like, hey, especially if you've got a, kind of loyal customer base, people are searching for the types of things you want, that's where Google can become really, really valuable, so that you're, kind of working off of that intent. We call that intent-based marketing, versus interruption-based marketing for Facebook or Instagram, kind of putting up an ad in front of somebody. And it both have a spot. So it's not that one is better or than the other. It's just kind of understanding where you are in your own development as a brand, and then understanding how to rely on either or. At the end of the day, it's really kind of doing both in parallel, to kind of figure out the direction you want to go.
I think that's such a great point to have made, because especially in, as you described it, the craft food industry, and we call it the good food industry, there's a lot of products that are very unique that perhaps have not existed before, or that come from a certain culture, right? And the awareness around the ingredient or the product itself or the uses of that product are new, right? To so many people. So simply doing Google ads may not be effective in those cases, because people haven't been introduced to this yet. They're not actively searching for it yet, because we need to teach them first that this thing exists and that it's new and what your story is. I think that's a really important point that you just made. That's great.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's probably doing a disservice by bringing this up this late into the episode, but I think it all comes down to, you've got to know kind of what's your goal and your immediate goal. That what are you trying to get done? So if you've already got a pretty loyal customer base, you got a lot of people out there, you're just trying to build some more purchases, Google ads may work really well for that. If you're trying to break into the market, teach somebody about a very specific product feature, maybe something like an Instagram or Facebook, or even what we use a lot is email marketing, because there, you get a little bit more opportunity to talk to people. You have a couple more touch points to really execute that, educational journey, teaching not only about the product, but about the brand and your values and the different things that you do. So it's all about just having in mind kind of where you are, what your goal is. Are you looking for more new customers? Are you looking to make more money out of the existing customers? Are you looking to break into a different geography? Yeah. All those different things. Let's go ahead and craft a strategy or find a way to utilize all these different channels. It's not necessarily that any one is better or worse than the other. They all have their points, and they all like kind of excel in different areas and are not as good in different areas. So making sure that you're kind of using the right channel to get you the right type of traffic and show up in front of the right type of people.
I love that so much. It's so great because, going back to what I mentioned earlier, it's like not every strategy is for every business. And you can have a business that's very similar to someone else's, but be in a different stage, have a different objective for what you're trying to achieve right now, right? And the strategy needs to reflect where you are and where you want to be heading. And it's a holistic approach, which is something that we talk about all of the time here on the podcast and in our group coaching programs. It's that nothing happens in a vacuum, right? And there is no like one thing, like silver bullet, right? That will make it all work and will help you achieve your goals overnight. It really is a complete strategy. And not only that, but the willingness to implement the strategy, review how it's going, and make changes. As you said, it's going to take a little time for Google to get some data points and for you and your team to get some data points to really tweak this and maximize the ROAS, if you will.
Definitely.
I love it. Is there anything else we should talk about before we wrap up today?
No, I think we've touched on a lot of the good points. I think, like just to kind of keep coming back and hammering that same point. The biggest thing is, don't just think, hey, I've started up my business, I'm going to turn on Google ads or really any marketing channel. It's just, a spigot of traffic and I'm going to profit. You really need to think through, why are you selling your products online? What are you trying to get done with selling your products online? Is that, a channel you're growing? Is it just something you're doing to get yourself out there and have a little more awareness? Really make sure that you're taking the time to understand what your goals are. And then from there, you can kind of start to think through, okay, well, what strategies are going to be most appropriate and which direction can we go there?
Yeah. So where can our listeners find you online if they want to learn more about PPC Pitbulls or maybe get in touch with you?
Yeah, so you can always find me in any of the standard channels. I'm on LinkedIn. For PPC Pitbulls, we focus pretty much everything onto ppcpitbulls.com. One of the big things, or kind of our free resources, something we're really proud of, is a digital marketing maturity model. So if you come to ppcpitbulls.com/digital marketing maturity model, hopefully we can get the link in the show notes. That kind of walks through a lot of the points we talked through today to kind of think through, where are you in your digital marketing journey? Have you set up the site properly? Have you kind of thought through all the different things you need to do? And then, when are the right times to kind of start adding in, whether it be Google ads or Facebook ads or something else. So yeah, it could be a really valuable resource. Hopefully people will take advantage of that. And then we also do a 30-minute free strategy session. So if you, get through that and you still have questions, you can always reach out, and we're more than happy to, just catch up and talk about your business a little bit.
That's great. We will definitely put the link in the show notes. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask where the name PPC Pitbulls came from and what it stands for.
Yeah, so it's my pit bull. Here, I can turn the camera around.
Let's do it.
We always say this is Percy. She's the original PPC Pitbull.
Oh,
my coworker here. But yeah, so that's her namesake.
I love it. That's so sweet. Well, Thank you, Andy, for spending some time with us today. I think that you provided a ton of valuable information and insight into Google Ads in a really short amount of time. So we thank you for that. We'll provide the link in the show notes, as you mentioned, and hopefully we'll see you around the community again sometime soon.
Absolutely. This has been great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining Andy and I here today. If you are working on growing your online sales channel, be sure to download his free tool from the show notes. If you're not sure about your profit margins and whether or not Google Ads will be financially beneficial to your business, we've also got a direct link to the DIY profit assessment course. This is the tool that we offer to help you understand your margins and how to move forward in your business profitably. I'll be back with a brand new episode in 2 weeks. But in the meantime, join last episode's guest, Brady DeLong, and I for a LinkedIn Live event on Friday, September 16th. We're going live on my page at 11:30 a.m. Pacific time to answer your questions. You can submit them to us in advance by emailing jointheconvo@thegoodfoodcfo.com. I'm excited to hear from you and hope to see you there.